Airport employees humiliated and kicked out Jasmine Jordan. But everything changed when her father showed up. The sun had barely risen over Chicago, painting the morning sky with shades of orange and pink. Jasmine Jordan, 28, determined to carve out her identity beyond her famous family, adjusted her backpack and glanced at her phone. It was just after 6:30 a.m., and she was on her way to catch a flight to New York. She had been invited to present her research at a prestigious young conference, a chance to share her voice and ideas with other brilliant minds. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, her mind consumed by rehearsed speeches and possible audience questions. Her father, Michael Jordan, 62, had given her words of encouragement the night before, still echoing in her mind. "Remember, you're there because of your work and dedication. No one can take that from you." She appreciated her father's support, but it was hard not to feel the weight of her last name wherever she went. As she entered the bustling terminal at O'Hare International Airport, the noise and chaos of the morning hit her like a wave. Announcements echoed above, interspersed with the hum of voices and the sound of rolling luggage across the tiled floor. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint smell of aviation fuel in the air. Jasmine navigated the crowded space with ease, weaving through groups of travelers. Approaching the check-in counter, she handed over her ticket and ID. The employee behind the counter, whose badge read M. Reynolds, barely looked up as she took the documents. "Good morning," Jasmine said, her tone polite but direct. Finally, Reynolds raised her eyes, narrowing them slightly as she examined Jasmine's face, then her documents. "You're flying to New York?" she asked in a neutral yet cutting tone. "Yes," Jasmine replied. "Business class." Reynolds raised an eyebrow and held the ticket in the air, as if inspecting its authenticity. The pause lingered, making the air between them tense. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" Reynolds asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Jasmine blinked, surprised. "Yes, of course. Is there a problem?" Reynolds' lips pressed into a thin line as she typed something into the computer. "We don't usually see passengers like—" She stopped mid-sentence, as if realizing she had said something inappropriate. "Never mind. Just double-checking to make sure everything's in order." Jasmine felt a flash of irritation but decided to ignore it. She wasn't going to let a rude employee ruin her morning. However, when Reynolds called over another agent and whispered something while pointing in Jasmine's direction, her irritation turned into anger. The second agent, a stern-looking man, approached and examined her ID with exaggerated care. "This ticket is for business class," he said, his voice dripping with suspicion. "I know," Jasmine replied firmly. "It's my ticket." The man exchanged a glance with Reynolds before reluctantly nodding. "Right. You can go," he muttered with disdain. Jasmine took her documents and headed towards security. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her, but she ignored them. Her father's advice echoed in her mind. "Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." The security line was long but orderly. She passed through the metal detector without issue, grabbed her backpack off the conveyor belt, only to be blocked by a TSA agent. "I need to perform a secondary screening," he said. Jasmine frowned. "Is there a problem?" "Just a random check," he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. The random check involved an invasive examination, a full search of her bag, and repeated questions about her trip. "Who bought your ticket?" the agent asked. "I did," Jasmine replied, annoyed. "It's for a conference." The agent laughed. "Pretty fancy for someone flying business class." Jasmine blushed with indignation but controlled herself. She knew better than to escalate the situation. When they finally released her, she grabbed her belongings and headed to the boarding gate. However, as she approached, she noticed a group of airline staff whispering and pointing in her direction. A middle-aged employee approached. "Miss, I need to see your ticket and ID again." Jasmine handed over the documents, maintaining her patience. The woman inspected them slowly before speaking. "We've been informed that there may be a problem with your ticket. Please come with me." "What kind of problem?" Jasmine asked, her voice rising in pitch. "Just a routine check," the woman replied, already walking toward a side hallway. Jasmine hesitated, her instincts telling her something was wrong, but she followed. Her heart raced as she realized they were moving away from the gate area. The woman stopped and turned coldly. "We can't allow you to board this flight. You'll need to leave the airport." Jasmine looked at her stunned. "What? Why? We have our reasons, the woman shrugged. Fury washed over Jasmine. This is unacceptable. I haven't done anything wrong. If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll call security. Jasmine clenched her fists, holding back tears. She grabbed her phone and called the only person she knew would make things right. Dad, she said, her voice trembling. I need you. The response came immediately and firmly from the other end of the line. I'm on my way. But for Jasmine Jordan, these words were not enough to suppress the storm brewing inside her. Standing at the shadow of the bustling O'Hare International Airport, her mind reeled from the events of the last half hour. The humiliation of being treated as if she didn't belong had crept into her, and now, with her flight scheduled to depart in less than 45 minutes, she found herself stuck in the hallway where she had been pulled aside. The place was strangely quiet compared to the chaos of the terminal. The woman who had escorted her there had returned to the main gate area, leaving Jasmine alone by a door marked only with authorized personnel. She gripped her bag tightly, her fingers trembling as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Her instincts told her to leave and return to the terminal's light, where at least there would be witnesses, but she hesitated, unsure of what might happen if she tried. Her phone vibrated in her hand with a text message from her father. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Stay where you are. Jasmine exhaled shakily. The assurance helped calm her nerves, but the indignation still burned within her. Why had she been chosen? She replayed the events of the morning in her mind, the faces of the TSA agents, the airline staff, the whispers, and the glances. It wasn't hard to identify the pattern. She had grown up recognizing the insidious and silent ways people let their prejudices show. But this was different. This was blatant. As her thoughts spiraled, the sound of approaching footsteps jolted her. 2 TSA agents appeared, a man and a woman, both with rigid postures and stern expressions. The man held a clipboard firmly like a shield, while the woman carried a handheld scanner. Ma'am, we need to conduct additional screening, the man said, his tone cold and lacking empathy. Please place your bag on the table. Jasmine's jaw tightened. I've already been searched twice, she replied, her voice firm but controlled. She had learned from her parents the power of composure, even in the face of blatant injustice. The woman's expression didn't falter. This is a random check, ma'am. Compliance is mandatory. Jasmine stared at them for a moment, then reluctantly placed her bag on the table. She watched as they opened the zipper and began rifling through her belongings without any regard for organization. Her laptop was pulled out and opened as if they were searching for hidden compartments. Her toiletry bag was emptied with no ceremony, its contents scattered across the table in a mess. Is this really necessary? Jasmine asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. The male agent ignored the question, holding up a book she had brought. What is this? He asked, his tone almost accusatory. It's a book for the conference I'm attending, Jasmine replied, her patience wearing thin. He squinted at the cover, as if it were written in an alien language, then tossed the book aside. The female agent passed the portable scanner over her laptop, her movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the power she held in that moment. Jasmine looked around, hoping to catch the attention of someone who could intervene, but the corridor remained empty. Her isolation made the situation even more oppressive. After several minutes of inspection, the agents pulled back. We'll need to retain your bag for further analysis, the man said, his tone making it clear that there was no room for discussion. What? Jasmine protested, instinctively stepping forward. You can't just take my things. I have a flight to catch. The woman's gaze hardened. Ma'am, if you don't cooperate, we will have to escalate the situation. Escalate? Jasmine repeated, her voice rising uncontrollably. You've already humiliated me in front of everyone at security, and now you're trying to confiscate my things? This is harassment. Her words echoed through the empty corridor. The agents exchanged a look, their expressions unreadable, before the man stepped forward. You need to calm down, he said, his tone laced with condescension. We're just doing our job. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to control her racing heart. She knew she couldn't let her emotions take over. Not here. Not now. I'm not going anywhere without my bag, she declared, her voice lower but no less firm. The male agent opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, a new figure appeared at the end of the corridor. It was the manager who had confronted her earlier, flanked by two security guards. His presence made the already suffocating space feel even smaller. "What's going on here?" demanded the manager, his sharp voice cutting through the tension. The female agent straightened. "We're conducting secondary screening. She's refusing to comply." "That's not true," Jasmine interrupted, her frustration boiling over. "I've complied with everything you've asked, and now you're trying to confiscate my bag for no reason." The manager's eyes narrowed as he looked her up and down. "This is becoming a disruption, miss. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the airport." The words hit Jasmine like a slap. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice reduced to a whisper. "I haven't done anything wrong." The manager's expression remained unchanged. "We have the right to deny service to anyone who poses a potential security risk." "A security risk?" Jasmine repeated, incredulous. "You're calling me a threat because you don't like the way I look?" The silence that followed was deafening. The security guards stepped forward, their postures threatening. Jasmine felt her chest tighten, her breathing coming in short, shallow bursts. This couldn't be happening. "I'm calling my dad," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She pulled out her phone, hands shaking as she dialed the number. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing when the call connected almost instantly. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "I need you. They're kicking me out of the airport." Michael Jordan's voice was calm but firm. "Stay where you are. I'll handle this." When the call ended, Jasmine turned to the agents and the manager. "My dad is on his way," she said, her tone heavy with authority, dispelling any trace of her youth. "I suggest you think very carefully about what you do next." The manager hesitated, his confidence wavering for the first time. But before he could respond, the male agent murmured low enough for Jasmine to hear, "Daddy coming to save the day, huh?" Jasmine's jaw clenched, but she refused to rise to the bait. Instead, she stepped back, leaning against the wall as she waited to feel the footsteps of the guards and agents upon her, their judgment heavy in the air. But she refused to let them see her break anywhere beyond the corridor. The noise of the terminal continued. Unwavering announcements shouted for hurried passengers to go to their gates, and the world moved on as if nothing had happened except Jasmine. Time seemed to stand still, each second stretching into eternity, and then finally the sound of approaching footsteps reached her ears. Footsteps that carried a familiar rhythm, a calm. The relief of security washed over her as she looked up and saw her father walking toward her, his expression a mask of composed determination. The sound of Michael Jordan's footsteps drawing nearer filled the narrow corridor like the distant rumble of thunder. His presence was magnetic, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. The security guards instinctively straightened their expressions, which shifted from detached indifference to the focus of a manager at the forefront of the small group confronting Jasmine. They paused momentarily before adjusting their posture, and an uneasy smile flickered on their lips. Jasmine pushed off the wall, her relief palpable. She had always admired her father's ability to remain composed under pressure, and in that moment, his calm authority seemed like a shield against the storm of humiliation and frustration that had overwhelmed her since she arrived at the airport. "Miss Jordan," he said, his voice measured as if he hadn't noticed the tension in the air. "Are you okay?" Jasmine nodded, though her voice caught in her throat as she tried to respond. "They were going to kick me out of the airport." Michael glanced at the manager, his gaze unreadable, but heavy with expectation. "Is that true?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. The manager hesitated, looking at the TSA agents as if seeking support. "Sir, the woman began, her voice tinged with defensive irritation. "We had concerns regarding her behavior. She was becoming disruptive, and we have protocols in place for situations like this," Michael repeated, raising an eyebrow, his calm exterior unwavering, but there was a subtle sharpness in his tone. "Can you explain exactly how my daughter was being disruptive?" The manager opened his mouth to respond, but the male TSA agent interrupted, his voice overflowing with misplaced confidence. "She refused to comply with our security procedures. We were just trying to do our job." "That's not true," Jasmine interrupted, her voice shaking with anger. "I followed everything you asked. You treated me like a criminal for no reason, and when I defended myself from harassment, you decided to call it disruption." The male agent's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. The manager, however, seemed to shrink a little under Jasmine's words. Michael's gaze swept over the group, hardening his expression. "It seems to me there was a serious misunderstanding," he said, his voice firm but carrying undeniable authority. "Let's address this properly. First, my daughter is not leaving this airport unless she chooses to. Second, I would like a detailed explanation of why she was singled out in the first place." The manager cleared his throat, clearly struggling to maintain control of the situation. "Sir, as I said, we have protocols. Your ticket was flagged, and we followed up accordingly." "Flagged for what?" Michael asked, his tone now sharp with impatience. "She had a valid ticket, valid ID, and was ready to board her flight. What exactly led to this additional scrutiny?" The woman hesitated, her face contorting. The male TSA agent, however, crossed his arms and spoke again. "Sometimes we have to make judgments, especially when something doesn't seem right." "Something didn't seem right," Michael repeated, his voice dropping slightly, the weight of his words seeming to press down on the room. "You made a judgment based on how my daughter looks?" The tension in the corridor was almost suffocating. The female TSA agent nervously glanced at her colleague, who avoided her gaze. "I assure you, sir," the manager began, his voice trembling slightly, "we do not tolerate discrimination in this airport." "That's an admirable policy," Michael said, his voice cold. "But actions speak louder than policies. From where I stand, this whole situation reeks of prejudice. My daughter's here, humiliated and distressed, because your team decided she didn't belong in first class. Am I wrong?" No one responded. The silence was deafening, a tacit admission of guilt. Michael exhaled slowly, the sound heavy with disappointment. He turned to Jasmine, his expression softening slightly. "Are you ready to go?" he asked gently. Jasmine nodded, gripping her purse tightly. She was ready to leave that nightmare behind, but part of her was frustrated by the idea of letting those people off the hook as she turned back to the manager. Stammering, "Wait, sir, perhaps we can discuss this further." Michael stopped, his back to the group when he spoke, his voice low and firm, but the warning in his tone was unmistakable. "You'll hear from me, and I suggest you prepare for a full review of your so-called protocols." Without another word, he placed a hand on Jasmine's shoulder and guided her back toward the main terminal. The corridor behind them remained strangely silent, the weight of their departure hanging heavily in the air as they walked. Jasmine felt a mixture of relief and lingering frustration. She looked at her father, searching his face for any sign of his true emotions, but his expression remained calm, his focus fixed straight ahead. "Dad," she started hesitantly, "I'm sorry you had to come here. I didn't know what else to do." Michael stopped and turned to face her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Jasmine, you don't need to apologize for defending yourself. What happened here today is unacceptable, and it's not your fault. You did the right thing by calling me." His words calmed some of the tension coiled in her chest, but the pain of the morning's events still lingered. "They treated me like I didn't belong," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I know," Michael replied, his tone heavy with a mix of anger and sadness, "and they will answer for it." As Michael and his daughter returned to the main terminal, the hum of life at the airport gradually filled the silence between the hurried announcements and the low murmur of conversations. It seemed jarring after the suffocating tension of the corridor. Jasmine looked at her father, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm of emotions churning inside her. She knew him well enough to recognize the sharpness in his measured step, the kind of silent fury he rarely allowed to surface. With the weight of the morning pressing down on her, every humiliating moment replayed in her mind. The accusatory questions, the invasive searches, the insinuations that she didn't belong. It was exhausting, and yet her father's presence seemed like a steady anchor in the chaos. They stopped near a row of chairs in the terminal, far enough from the security checkpoint to avoid prying eyes, but close enough for Michael's protective instincts to remain on high alert. Jasmine sat down, clutching her purse as if it were a lifeline. Her father remained standing, his eyes scanning the area with an air of calm and authority. "Dad," she said, her voice soft but tense, I don't want this to happen to anyone else. Her words hung in the air for a moment before Michael nodded. It won't, he said firmly. We'll make sure it doesn't happen again. At that moment, a uniformed airline representative approached them, a mixture of discomfort and professional composure. She was flanked by two other staff members, their body language stiff and uncomfortable. The lead representative, the woman with a badge reading M. Patel, addressed Michael directly. Mr. Jordan, she began, her tone carefully controlled, on behalf of the airport and our airline, I want to apologize for any inconvenience you and your daughter may have experienced this morning. Michael turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. Inconvenience? He repeated, his voice calm but with an edge that made the woman visibly shift. Standing is what you call... Patel hesitated, her composure wavering. I assure you, we take these matters very seriously, she continued. I've been informed of the situation, and I want you to know that we are reviewing this. Reviewing, Michael echoed, his tone clipped. Let me be clear, Miss Patel. My daughter was humiliated, singled out, and treated like she didn't belong here. This isn't an inconvenience, it's discrimination. And if your team can't see the difference, then you have a much bigger problem on your hands. Jasmine watched the exchange in silence, her emotions a mix of revenge and lingering frustration. Patel's face stiffened, and she looked to her colleagues as if seeking support. We deeply regret what happened, Patel said, her voice now softer. If there's anything we can do to make this... All right, this ends here, Michael interrupted, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of undeniable authority. First, I want the names of all the TSA agents and staff involved in this incident. Second, I expect a full report on your so-called protocols that allowed this to happen in the first place. And third, I want you to ensure that this kind of behavior is not only addressed but eradicated. Patel nodded quickly, pulling a notepad from his pocket. Of course, Mr. Jordan. I will personally oversee the investigation. You'll do more than oversee, Michael said. You'll act, because if I don't see immediate, concrete changes, I'll make sure this incident is brought to the attention of all the major media outlets in the country. The threat, though delivered in a measured tone, sent a visible ripple of discomfort through the group. Patel scribbled furiously in his notepad, shaking his head as the representatives walked away. Michael turned to Jasmine. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. We're not done here, he said softly. But first, let's get you on that flight. The airline's decision to delay the flight for Michael and Jasmine caused a stir among the passengers. Whispers spread like wildfire, and several people craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the former basketball player's daughter. Jasmine, feeling the weight of the stairs, kept her gaze low as she followed her father to the gate. The gate agent, a young woman with a nervous smile, quickly scanned their boarding passes and gestured with exaggerated politeness. Big flight, Mr. Jordan, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Michael gave a brief nod, his focus unwavering as they walked through the jet bridge. Jasmine couldn't help but exhale a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. For the first time that morning, she felt a glimmer of relief when they were finally seated. Michael turned to her, his expression softening. Are you okay? He asked. Jasmine nodded, though her voice betrayed her lingering discomfort. I'm just tired. Michael placed his hand over hers. I know, but you did the right thing, Jasmine. You stood up for yourself by calling me. That takes courage. Her eyes filled with unshed tears, but she blinked them away. I shouldn't have had to do that. You shouldn't have, Michael agreed. But until people stop making assumptions based on how someone looks, we have to keep pushing back. The flight went smoothly, but Jasmine couldn't shake the weight that had settled over her as she stared out the window, the clouds below them stretching endlessly on the horizon. Her mind replayed the events of the morning. She thought about the TSA agents, the manager, the smiling guard, the people who probably never stopped to consider the impact of their actions. Her father's voice interrupted her thoughts. What are you thinking, Jasmine? She turned to him, her expression resolute. How to make sure this never happens again. Michael smiled faintly, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. Good, because this fight isn't just about you or me. It's about everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. His words stayed with her, filling her with a renewed sense of purpose. By the time they landed in New York, Jasmine felt more determined than ever to turn this experience into something meaningful. As they exited the plane, Michael's phone buzzed with a message that he read quickly, his expression darkening a bit. "What's that?" Jasmine asked. He held the screen for her to see. It was an email from Patel detailing the immediate steps the airline and TSA were taking. But what caught Jasmine's attention was the final line. "We have also placed the involved agents on administrative leave pending further investigation." It was a start. The email hung in the air between Jasmine and Michael as they walked through the terminal of John F. Kennedy International Airport. The mention of the TSA agents being placed on administrative leave seemed like a small victory, but it wasn't enough to dispel the weight of what had happened. Michael's jaw tightened as he slid the phone back into his pocket, his mind already working on the next steps. For Jasmine, though, the events of the morning remained an open wound. The humiliation, the invasive scrutiny, the dismissive attitudes, each moment lingered in her thoughts like a splinter she couldn't remove. As they left the airport, the noise of New York City offered little comfort. The chaos of the city mirrored her internal turbulence. "Do you think anything will really change?" Jasmine began hesitantly as they settled into the back seat of a waiting car. "I mean, they suspended those agents, but that's just damage control." Michael turned to her, his gaze steady. "You're right to be skeptical," he said. "The suspensions are a start, but it's not enough accountability. We need to dig deeper into the systems that allow this kind of behavior. They need to be dismantled." Jasmine nodded, though frustration still simmered beneath the surface. "I just don't want this to be swept under the rug." "It won't be," Michael assured her. "We'll make sure of that." As the car navigated the busy street, Michael made a call to his team. His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable edge of urgency. He described the events at Reagan National Airport in precise detail, stressing the need for an immediate response. By the time they arrived at their destination, he had already set a plan in motion. The story began to unfold in the media the next morning. News agencies picked up the incident in their headlines. "Stark and Jasmine Jordan accused TSA of discrimination at airport. Ex-president calls for accountability over misconduct and bias at the gates. A call for change." Michael's office released a statement later that day, describing the events and calling for immediate reform. The statement was measured, but its implications were clear. This was not an isolated incident, and the Jordans were committed to using their platform to fight the systemic issues that allowed this discrimination to persist. The public response was swift. Polarized support flooded social media with messages of solidarity, while critics accused the Jordans of overreacting or using their influence unfairly. Despite the noise, one thing was clear: the incident had struck a nerve. Within days, an internal investigation was launched at Reagan National Airport. The TSA and the airline involved faced intense scrutiny as reports emerged detailing not only Jasmine's experience, but also similar complaints from other passengers who had been subjected to questionable treatment. Whistleblowers within the TSA began to come forward. Their accounts painted a troubling picture of a workplace culture with unchallenged implicit bias. The agents involved in Jasmine's case were placed on administrative leave pending the investigation, but their actions had already drawn widespread condemnation, particularly one agent, identified in leaked reports as Mark Henson. He was particularly vocal about his alleged behavior, stating that his decisions were based on unverified protocols. Michael Jordan watched the coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and frustration. The media attention was necessary to keep the pressure on, but he knew real change required more than public outrage. It required systemic reform in Chicago. Michael met with representatives from the TSA and the Department of Transportation. The meeting was tense from the start. The room was filled with bureaucrats eager to defend their policies, but his reputation and presence commanded respect, and his words left no room for evasion. "This isn't just about my daughter," he began, his tone firm. "This is about everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong because of how they look, where they came from, or what someone assumes about them." The events at Chicago International Airport are a symptom of a much larger problem, and it's a problem we have the power and responsibility to fix. He outlined a series of proposed reforms, each aimed at addressing the systemic issues within the TSA. The measures included mandatory bias training for all employees, the establishment of an independent oversight committee to handle complaints, and the implementation of clearer protocols to avoid abuse of power. The employees listened, some nodding in agreement, while others exchanged tired glances. By the end of the meeting, Michael had secured the commitment to begin implementing the reforms, though he knew the road ahead would be long and complicated with resistance. Meanwhile, the agents who had targeted Jasmine faced consequences. Public pressure mounted as more details of their behavior began to surface. Henson, the agent who mocked Jasmine during the security screening, was particularly defamed, with videos of his previous interactions with passengers starting to circulate online. These videos revealed a pattern of rude and disdainful behavior. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from a fellow TSA employee who anonymously reported that Henson had made disparaging comments about black passengers on several occasions. The whistleblower's report, combined with the growing pile of complaints, led to the termination of his contract. His colleagues who had been complicit in the incident faced similar fates. The manager who ordered Jasmine's removal from the airport was also fired after an internal review deemed his actions unjustified. His departure was announced as a resignation, but sources confirmed he had been pressured to resign. As the precipitation of changes took place, Jasmine closely followed the news, her emotions a mix of relief and lingering anger. She was glad to see the individuals who had harmed her being held accountable, but she knew their punishments were only a small part of the puzzle. In the following weeks, she began speaking out about her experience, sharing her story in interviews and events. Her words were heartfelt and powerful, resonating with audiences across the country. She spoke not only about her own ordeal, but about the broader issues of prejudice and inequality, using her platform to amplify the voices of others who had been silenced. Michael was by her side the entire time, offering guidance and support, but also encouraging her to find her own voice. "This is your fight too," he told her one night as they prepared for a TV interview. "You have the power to make a difference, Jasmine. Don't be afraid to use it." By the end of the month, the reforms Michael had advocated for began to take shape. TSA employees across the country underwent mandatory training, and a new hotline to report misconduct was established. The Oversight Committee, though still in its early stages, promised greater accountability for the agency. For Jasmine, the changes were a step in the right direction, but she knew that the fight was not just about the experience at Chicago International Airport. The incident was a painful reminder of the work still to be done, but it also showed the power of speaking out and the importance of standing up for what was right, even in the face of adversity. The morning sun cast a golden glow over Chicago as Michael Jordan sipped his coffee on his porch. The events of the past few weeks had been a whirlwind of media attention, high-stakes meetings, and policy proposals. But as he looked out over the city, a sense of quiet resolve settled within him. This was not the first time he had fought for systemic change, and it wouldn't be the last. Inside the house, Jasmine was preparing for another public appearance. She had been invited to speak at a national conference on social justice and equity, an opportunity to share her story and the lessons she had learned. The thought of standing in front of such a large audience made her stomach churn, but she knew the importance of her voice in this moment. As she stood in front of the mirror adjusting her blazer, her father appeared in the doorway. "How are you feeling?" he asked in his gentle tone. Jasmine turned to him, a mix of nerves and determination in her eyes. "Nervous," she admitted, "but ready." Michael smiled, walking into the room. "You've got this," he said. "Just speak from the heart. People need to hear your truth." His words were comforting, but Jasmine couldn't shake the weight of responsibility. The incident at Chicago International Airport had been a catalyst for change, but it was also a reminder of the widespread qualities of inequality that still existed. She was determined to use her platform to push the conversation forward, but the road ahead seemed daunting. The conference was held in a large hall in downtown Chicago, with banners proclaiming themes of justice, equality, and progress. When Jasmine and Michael arrived, they were met with a wave of applause and flashes of cameras. The attention was overwhelming, but Jasmine focused on the steady presence of her father by her side, the gravitational pull of his unwavering support. The audience was a diverse mix of activists, policymakers, students, and community leaders. As Jasmine stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent, all eyes on her. She took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium for support. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. My name is Jasmine Jordan, and I am here today to share a story that, unfortunately, is not exclusive to me. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. A few weeks ago, I was traveling to New York for a conference that should have been a routine trip, but it turned into an experience of humiliation, prejudice, and discrimination. I was singled out, searched, and ultimately removed from the airport, not because of anything I did, but because of how I was perceived. Her voice grew stronger as she recounted the events in detail, describing the invasive searches, the disdainful attitudes, and the blatant assumptions made about her. She spoke of the pain and frustration she felt, but also of the resilience and determination that brought her here. This is not just about me, she said, her gaze sweeping over the audience. It's about every person who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong. It's about a system that allows prejudice to dictate how people are treated, and it's about the change we must demand together. The room erupted into applause as she finished. Her words resonated deeply with those present. When she left the stage, her father greeted her with a proud smile, his eyes shining with pride. "You were amazing," he said, pulling her into a brief hug. It was exactly what people needed to hear. Jasmine felt a wave of relief and pride, but also a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for justice was far from over, but Jasmine knew she had the strength to keep going. In the weeks that followed the reforms Michael had championed, mandatory bias training for TSA employees began to be rolled out, with sessions aimed at challenging stereotypes and promoting empathy. An independent commission was created with the task of investigating complaints and holding employees accountable for their conduct. The discrimination hotline became operational, providing passengers with a direct channel to voice their concerns. The changes were met with mixed reactions. While many praised the efforts as a step toward equity, others resisted, arguing that the measures were unnecessary or burdensome. Michael was no stranger to such opposition and remained steadfast in his commitment to the cause. Jasmine also continued to advocate for change. She used her platform to amplify the voices of others, sharing stories of those who had faced similar injustices. Her speeches, interviews, and social media posts sparked important conversations, inspiring others to speak out and demand accountability. One afternoon, Jasmine received an email from a young woman who had been stuck crossing Chicago International Airport shortly after the incident. The woman described how she had been treated with kindness and respect by TSA agents, a stark contrast to her previous experiences. "I don't know what changed, but I wanted to thank you. Your story made a difference," the email said. Jasmine read the email twice. Her heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and hope. She forwarded the message to her father, who responded with a simple message: "This is why we fight." As the months passed, the effects of the incident continued to spread. Other airports began to adopt similar reforms, and advocacy groups pushed for broader changes across the transportation sector. The conversation around prejudice and discrimination extended beyond the TSA, addressing issues in policing, education, and healthcare. For Jasmine, the experience was transformative. It had been painful and humiliating, but it was also a powerful lesson in resilience and the importance of speaking out. She found her voice and learned to use it to create change. One night, while she and her father sat on the porch, watching the city lights shine in the distance, she turned to him with a thought. "Do you think things will really change?" she asked. Michael took a sip of his coffee and, with his steady gaze, replied, "Constant change is slow, but every step forward matters. Every voice raised, every injustice challenged, it all adds up. The fact that you're asking this question, that you care enough to fight for a better future, is a sign that we're moving in the right direction." Jasmine nodded, determination in her heart. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was ready to walk it. The story of Jasmine Jordan's experience at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport became a symbol of the ongoing fight for justice and equality. It served as a reminder of the power of resilience, the importance of accountability, and the potential for change when people unite. And for Jasmine, it was the beginning of a journey that would shape her future in ways she had never imagined. Thank you for watching. Let me know where you're watching from. Give this video a like if it made you reflect. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Share this video with your friends to inspire meaningful change.